All right, let's get right into it. We're going to talk about something that affects literally millions of paychecks, but most of us have probably never even thought about it. It's called time clock rounding. Now, I know it sounds like some tiny, boring detail, but this old rule is right at the heart of multi-million-dollar lawsuits. It's kicking off this huge debate about what it even means to be paid fairly in our digital world.
So let me just ask you straight up. Is it possible your paycheck is getting smaller 1 minute at a time? Because yeah, it's a real possibility. Those little minutes that get shaved off here and there, they can add up to hours of unpaid work over a year. So let's break down exactly how this even happens.
To really get what's going on, we actually have to go back in time. See, this rule wasn't dreamed up for a world with smartphones and instant data. No, it was designed for a completely different, you might say analog, era of work. I want you to picture it. It's the 1960s. The workplace runs on these old-school analog punch clocks. You've got long lines of workers waiting to stick a paper card into a machine that goes ka-chunk and physically stamps the time. Then some poor payroll clerk has to take all those cards, which are probably smeared and hard to read, and manually calculate everyone's hours. It was, to put it mildly, a massive administrative headache. So, to make life easier for everybody, the Department of Labor came up with a rule. They basically said, look, we get it's hard to be super precise with these cards. You can round employee time to the nearest quarter hour. The entire legal reason for this was something called administrative difficulty. But, and this is a big but, it came with a major catch. And here's that catch. It's a huge one. The rule only works if it's fair. Over time, the rounding has to even out, so that employees get paid for all the time they've actually worked. The minutes an employee might lose one day should be balanced out by minutes they gain on another. The whole policy has to be neutral. It can't be a tool that systematically underpays people.
Okay, so how does this math actually play out on your time card? Well, the most common way to do it is rounding to the nearest quarter hour, and it even has a nickname. People often call this the 7-minute rule. So check out the table here. If you clock in anywhere from 1 to 7 minutes past the hour, let's say 8:07, the system rounds your time down to 8 o'clock. Hey, you just got paid for 7 minutes you didn't work. But if you clock in just 1 minute later, at 8:08, it rounds your time up to 8:15, and you just lost 7 minutes of pay. It's this razor's edge where single minute makes all the difference.
And this just shows you the risk perfectly. So how on earth do you lose 22 minutes? Well, in a worst-case scenario, every single punch in your day goes against you. Imagine this. You clock in at 8:08, you lose 7 minutes. You clock out for lunch at 12:22, that rounds down to 12:15, you lose another 7 minutes. You clock back in at 12:38, that rounds up to 12:45, you lose another 7 minutes. We're already at 21 minutes gone. And look, this isn't just some theory. These numbers come from actual lawsuits.
Now sure, there are other ways to do it, like rounding to the nearest 6 or 5 minutes. But the most important thing to remember is this. Any system that's designed to only favor the employer is flat out illegal. That's called asymmetric rounding, and it violates the Fair Labor Standards Act because its only purpose is to underpay people, which, yeah, the law doesn't like.
And all this brings us to the modern battlefield, the courtroom. With digital time clocks now that can track every single second, that old excuse for rounding is being put on trial. And California? Well, California is ground zero for this fight.
You can just see how this builds. The legal ground here is literally shaking. For years, this case, Seize Candy, was the law of the land. It said rounding was okay as long as it was neutral. But then, 2021, and the Donahue case happened. This was a total game changer. It ruled that employers can absolutely not round time for meal breaks. And that decision? It created a crack in the foundation that led straight to the massive Camp v. Home Depot case, which is now making the courts ask a very pointed question: is rounding ever okay when your clock is digital?
And right there, that's the logical trap. The Donahue ruling forced companies to make their systems track meal breaks to the exact minute. So the question becomes, if the technology is precise enough for your lunch break, why can't it be just as precise for the start and end of your day? That whole administrative difficulty excuse starts to sound pretty hollow, right?
This quote from the court in the Camp versus Home Depot case just says it all. The judge basically pointed out that the system already knows the exact time. To round it, the software actually has to perform an extra step to change the data. So rounding isn't a shortcut anymore. It's an intentional choice not to pay for the exact time worked.
And what starts in California rarely stays in California. This legal challenge is spreading, creating a domino effect across the whole country.
as other states start to question this old analog rule.
This risk map gives you a quick snapshot of where things stand. When you see critical risk, like in California, it means the whole practice could be banned very soon. High risk in places like Washington and Pennsylvania means there have already been huge court cases that make rounding a massive gamble for employers. And in Oregon, it's pretty much already prohibited. The legal trend is unmistakable.
Let's look a little closer. A federal court in Oregon just stated bluntly, Oregon does not permit rounding. Boom. In Washington, a massive jury verdict against Providence Health proved that even if a policy looks fair on paper, it can be proven to be unfair in practice. And in Pennsylvania, the state's highest court just threw out the whole idea that employers can ignore trifling amounts of unpaid time. That strikes right at the heart of the main defense for rounding.
So, where does all this leave us? What's the modern, the safe, the fair way to handle timekeeping now? Well, the answer really is about moving away from rounding completely and using a much clearer, simpler system.
The best practice today is to shift to what's called a grace period policy. Let's be crystal clear about the difference here. A rounding policy literally changes your pay. A grace period, on the other hand, separates your pay from discipline. So if you clock in at 8:04, you still get paid from 8:04, you just won't get a tardy mark from HR. It makes sure you're paid fairly, but it still gives managers the tools they need to track punctuality. It's the simple, fair solution. When these cases actually go to court, it all comes down to this really simple math. The lawyers use a formula. They take the hours you were paid for, and they subtract the hours you actually worked. If that final number is negative, you've been underpaid. It's really that simple, and that is the evidence that wins these massive lawsuits.
So, what's the gold standard here? For companies to stay safe and for workers to be treated fairly, the path forward is pretty clear. First, just get rid of rounding policies. The risk is just getting way too high. Second, pay to the exact minute. The technology is already there. Third, use grace periods to deal with tardiness. And finally, if a company feels it absolutely has to keep rounding, then they have a duty to constantly check their own data, find every single person who is underpaid, even by a few minutes, and pay them back. That's not just good business, it's just basic fairness.
And all this really leaves us with one final thought. In an age where our technology can track everything down to the literal second, does it make any sense at all to keep using a payment system that was designed for the limitations of the 1960s? That's the big question that courts and companies and all of us are going to have to answer very soon.
TimeTrex, digital solutions for your modern workforce.